Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here today. And I'm excited to talk about this. And I can see somebody who's maybe made a comment, excited to hear your perspectives on the role of management in post-COVID environment. And this is really to talk about what does change look like and change management in particular, because I've been looking at and trying to figure out, we went through so much change back when COVID hit 2 years ago. And remember when we had to go through everything together? Um, um, who would have thought that we were here today? And so just thinking about what we had to go through 2 years ago, we had to start wearing masks, to isolate, work from home. It was completely and totally radical. And so I really want to talk about what that experience has done for us. And also, when we think about change and change management, how are you thinking about change? And also, if you could please share some of your best and favorite techniques or approaches to change management, or even share how you have changed the way you create change because of COVID. I would be really curious to see that and have a conversation around that. So, a couple things I wanted to observe, and I have some notes here. So, I'm just going to be looking at them. One of the key things is how do we deal with change? Well, with COVID, one of the most interesting things is that we had no choice. We absolutely had to do it. It wasn't a choice that a change that we had a hand in, and that really did do a number for many of us. Our mental health really suffered. We still have very many friends and family members likely who are still going through a lot of the mental health impacts of the change because of COVID. And then for many of us, we were calling upon this resilience within ourselves to make the best of it because we had to. And we also use the opportunity to learn some new skills. I'll just use Zoom as an example. We never thought we could actually replace face-to-face meetings with Zoom, and we learned something very differently about that. But what really struck me is that even people we thought would never use this technology, let's say our grandparents, our parents, really learned how to use this. My parents are using it constantly. It's amazing to me. Granted, they are calling me all the time to say, how do I share this again? How do I give it to somebody else? And all these other like nuances of Zoom. But for the most part, they're pretty good at this. And so we're doing things that we never thought were possible. And the people in our lives are making changes in ways that we never thought they would be capable of doing. I think in many ways, we underestimated our ability to deal with change. And what COVID really showed us is that even under the most extreme circumstances, we're actually pretty good at this. We're actually quite a lot more adaptable to change than we think we are. And yet, as we're entering the third year of living with COVID, I want to turn our attention back to what is basically our new normal, a regular return back to regular operations, if you can call this regular. But now, when we have to change, and I've seen this a lot in organizations and with leaders I'm working with, we're resisting it. We're fighting it. We're like, no, we don't want to change. I know we have to, but the bargaining, the negotiating, we're uncomfortable with this. And I feel like, wait a minute, wait. 2 years ago, we did this huge change, and now you're saying this new change we're going is too much. But we did this huge change when we had to, we were forced to, and now when we have a choice in it, we choose not to. And we know that making these choices, it's going to be good for us. It's a strategy we believe in, but we're uncomfortable with it. And because we have a choice, we tend to push away from it. We want to not move as fast because it's extremely uncomfortable. So that's what I wanted to explore is how do we reconcile our ability to take on tremendous amounts of change, leverage that past experience, and then after that, post-COVID, how do we think about change management in new and different ways? Because I think we're so much more capable of creating change and managing change and adapting to change than we give ourselves credit for. So how do we tap into that again? Okay, so let's go into the meat of this. I just want to see if there are any comments. All right, so what Knox is saying here is denial, but we're still talking about buy-in for change. Absolutely. This is all about that. And so when we think about what COVID did, we went through all the stages of denial, frustration, depression, and then into acceptance and commitment. What happened with COVID is we had to move past denial, frustration, and depression and move immediately into acceptance because we had no choice. We just had to do it. And so we were dealing with all these other issues around the denial, around the frustration and depression as we were going to acceptance and then commitment. But because we had to do it, we had to shut down, we had to make these changes so quickly, we never got a chance to really, truly move through that. And that led to, again, a lot of emotional turmoil. And so the key here is that, as Knox was saying, the denial, that first part of change, is one of the hardest ones to overcome. And again, the reasons why we don't move forward into that stage of overcoming those first few stages is the belief that we have a choice, that and that choice depends on the definition of success. And we also sometimes don't see that the path forward is very clear. We know what the objective is. We may or may not want to do that. We don't know how we're going to get to that point even. And then frankly, our confidence in ourselves and our organization, the ability to actually be okay as we go through all this change, is questioned. We don't have that confidence to be able to pull it through. So my sense here, again, as always, change management is always about dealing with the emotions first, about dealing with those senses of denial, frustration, and depression that come with that initial wave of change. And unless we're able to deal with that, we're not going to be able to move forward. So I want to talk about some of those very specific objections that I hear. One of the ones, and I've talked about this, is the biggest one is I can't continue to innovate and make changes where we're still doing the old things. How do we keep doing things operationally excellent while making a change? As somebody was saying, how do I fly the plane while changing the wings on it? Can't do both at the same time, or can you? Well, I go back to saying when COVID hit, we were actually really good at being able to innovate and do all the new ways of thinking and working while still do our own jobs. So we can actually do this together at the same time and be fairly good at it too as well. The second question, an objection that I hear to creating change is we can't afford to get it wrong. So we need to make sure it's perfect. And I quote back and point again to our experience with COVID. Man, was that messy. The things that we had to do, the changes we had to make literally on the spur of the moment, they were far from perfect, but we did them anyways. And what were the downsides to that? There were quite a few. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of misgivings, but we got through it. And I think the examples that we can have are many. And so again, I go back to looking to our very recent experiences of how we dealt with change as a great way to pull out examples to build. The last part is around confidence. And then the objection I hear there is, I don't have confidence in myself or my leaders to be able to lead this change. Well, look back to what we did during the COVID times and say, wow, we really figured out a way along this. We weren't always perfect. We didn't always make the right decisions, but we got there in the end. So having confidence in ourselves and our leaders is a really important thing. So I want to pause and see if there are any comments. Oh my goodness, there's so many comments here. Let's go through some of these. So Andrea Jones says, so I think there's a difference between having no choice versus having some choice, a choice, forced change instead of buy-in. Absolutely. And I think, again, what COVID was one of those forced changes in some ways. But when we're asking for buy-in, we're asking for people to come along and do a change. And the question becomes, at what point do we give people that space in that room to have that buy-in, but to also give them that sense of confidence to say, look, we've done this before, we can do it again, and address each of these particular objections that we have. And I'll go through those in a second. Knox has this whole idea, like, how do you create that confidence and the comfort level? And in some ways, what I think is so important, Knox, is that confidence is key. Admitting that you may not be comfortable going through this is also very key. But there's some comfort, I think, in knowing that we're all going through this together. And that if we can create that scaffolding and that support, that container for that change, we can make it at least a bit more comfortable and less disruptive for each other. Here's a question from Renee. What's frustrating is that we were forced to implement change quickly, and now managers have dug their heels in against more change. Why not keep the momentum going? I hear you, Renee, because this is one of those natural human instincts to say, okay, enough change already. I have change fatigue. How do we now continue doing that? And people just say, I just need a break. I'm tired of this. Can we just stop changing for a little bit? And it's fine to give a pause, I think, for us to collect ourselves. But disruptive organizations are the ones who also say, we must keep going. We must keep going. A couple more comments here. Knox says, with COVID-19, we became much more empathetic and forgiving as we implemented change. So true. And then one last comment here from Andrew. I think there's something to be said about feeling like you have an informed choice. With a level of faith in others, or the Almighty. If there's an absence of trust and faith, it makes a difference. When we believe we have a choice, chance moves at the speed of trust. Absolutely. And I want to just make that a really clear point that Andrea made. The idea here that you feel like you have a choice, that you are moving into this. And the choice can sometimes be, we're going to move at speed A or speed B. The choice can't be to stay back home. And if you're going to stay where you are, if you don't want to go on this journey with us, then we have to have a different conversation. And do you belong in this group? Do you belong on this team still? Because if you're not going to go on this journey, you feel it's the wrong journey to go on, then we can't have you on the bus. And we are not willing to have that conversation frequently enough with the people that we're working with. So, the things that I want to talk about now is be able to talk about what are some of the actions. And somebody says here, can you talk about perspectives as it relates to change and how it needs to be looked at intentionally? We are going to go there right now because there are some actions that I want to talk about. The first one is really investing in your leadership, doubling down, because the thing that will help so much in going through this change is to make sure your leadership is as strong as possible in these perspectives of how to lead through change. The reality is most of the people who in leadership positions in our organizations are managers. They're not leaders. Managers maintain the status quo. Leaders create change. And if you're not creating change as a leader, then you're a manager. And there's nothing wrong with being a manager, but we really need leaders at this point in time. So it's really changing the expectations and developing the skills for people to be better leaders of change. And we know that from the perspective of employees, the great resignation is that people weren't leaving companies. They weren't leaving jobs. They were leaving their leaders. The leaders were not showing up in the way that they needed them. So one of the most powerful things I can recommend is to think about the type of relationship you want to have with your employees. What kind of relationship do they want to have with you? And to be very specific about defining what that relationship looks like. Because I think, let's see, we have Knox here with a great comment. The management with empathy and admitting that it won't be perfect is a key part, I believe, of being a great leader in this space, because you can't have a strong relationship if you have to be perfect all the time. Because show me a relationship that's perfect. It doesn't exist. Relationships are give and take. There's grace in the giving and the taking. There is an understanding that comes over time of empathy, of understanding where you are, of seeing you for your full self and appreciating you and all of your strengths. And when we have that in our relationships, and we have that in our teams and working relationships with each other, it is a fantastic experience. You feel like you're gelling on so many levels, that you're able to connect, that you are joined together in a mission together. Those are the best teams, the best leaders to be working for. And yet, we don't do this enough as leaders. We don't give enough training and support to leaders to build that kind of empathy, of that sense of being together in that way. So I think the number one thing is to think about how we can have a different type of relationship as leaders with our employees. Instead of command and control, you do your job, put your head down, and don't look up. Don't be asking questions. I have all the answers as a leader. Instead, as leaders, to step to the side, and instead of having all the answers, have a lot of questions, asking people, so how do you think we should approach this change? How do we think we should approach this problem? Asking them to bring forward their ideas, to be creating a more inclusive and belonging, a sense of belonging, so that everybody can bring their ideas to the table. It is so important, because unless we can create that kind of environment, we're not going to be able to do that. Let's see. The second idea here is being able to create better and provide better change management practices for every leader. Whatever change management is out there, your organization may have one or not. Use that and make sure that people are using it. Again, there's no one perfect model that's out there. One of the ones that I really like is the PROSCI model. I'm sorry I didn't put it into the text here, but it's spelled PROSCI. It's called the ADKAR model for individual change. And it's just one model that I find very, very helpful. And it's the idea that you have 5 outcomes: awareness. This is the change, awareness of what it means. The desire, what does it mean? What's in it for me? The knowledge, do I have the training? Do I know what to do next? Do I have the ability? Do I have the confidence and the tools and the resources, and I'm confident about what is being asked of me? And then finally, the most important part that we forget about is reinforcement. Is there lots of recognition that the change I'm going through has been successful? So awareness of what the change is, desire, what's in it for me, knowledge and the training, the ability, and then the reinforcement. The ADKAR model is really powerful, because instead of looking at all the denials and all the negative things around change, it's looking at the positive side of what is needed to create individual change. And what it basically says is being super, super clear about what the change is, making the case, and then creating and working through all of the aspects of the plan. What I find more than anything else, the reason why people resist change is because they do not have the awareness and understanding. Well, what does this change mean? What does it look like? I hear about it at this high strategic level, but no one's been clear to me. How does it trickle down to me? How does it impact me? What do I need to do for that change? And unless we spell it out in such very clear levels for people, I think, again, that's the core of change management, because what COVID has taught us is that people have a tremendous amount of agency. And change management needs to flip its head. Instead of coming from the top down, think about it trickling up from the bottom up. That's a fundamental difference about how change management needs to work now. Because when we're focusing on people, creating that container, creating that process, that clarity, the structure, the scaffolding is so important to be able to help people feel comfortable and confident that they can go through this change. So lots of questions today, which is great. Let's see here. We talk about James, Knox has said, basically, this is all about the speed of trust. Andrea says that this is psychological safety is paramount. Absolutely. EQ is a cornerstone, and early adopters, and also allow them to be laggards too and plan for it. Some are excited, some are not. So there's lots of different people who are going to be coming in. Let's see. Lynn has a comment here. Asking questions is not a sign of weakness. Ironically, it demonstrates caring, trust, and willingness to learn and strength. Thank you for sharing that, Lynn. I think one of the key things that we have going on here is this redefinition of how leadership works in the space of change management. And feeling comfortable that you don't have all the answers is one of the biggest changes when it comes to change management. There was in the past an expectation that you have all the answers. And I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. Right now, we're saying, I have lots of questions. I have structure to contain us, to know what's doable, what's not doable. But we're going to figure out our way through this change together. And that's a very different approach post-COVID than I think that change management had beforehand. And the third thing, if the first thing was, again, thinking about how we can invest in better leadership, just the whole concept of leadership instead of being managers. The second thing is having a change management process and practices that every leader can tap into. Pick your favorite one, but have one that everyone is using and train people on how to use it. And the third thing is to create processes around change. I was just recently asked, as somebody who may not be in a leadership position or not in a position, how can I advocate for change? How can I advocate for more process? Well, demand it. Say, look, you're asking me to do X, Y, and Z. We have no processes. Either you're going to set one up or I'm going to set one up, because we need some sort of process, some sort of standard operating process for change. We are so good at spinning up new things, having processes for maintaining the status quo, and also for sometimes setting up new things, but not necessarily on how to stop things. We have very, very poor processes around that. So as a result, we just keep piling more and more things on. Do we have a process to prioritize and say, okay, I've got 100% committed. You're asking me to add 10 more percent. What 10% is going to come off? This, I think, is a key thing, being able to prioritize what change are going to happen, rather than having a gate that says what changes won't happen. So what I think is that the processes that allow us to make change, all aspects of change, starting things but stopping things, all depend on us being able to say yes. And yet so many of the things that we have as gates in our procedures and operations are built to slow down change with every single gate in decision making. So how do we speed things up instead, and to make it possible for people to say yes? What I find is oftentimes the accountability isn't there, that we have these gates to make sure everyone has checks and balances, everyone has an input, and it slows things down and makes things just slow to a crawl. And instead, what we should be doing is saying, if these are our objectives and these are the decisions that are going to be made, then who gets to decide? And that one person has the accountability and the responsibility to see that carry through with speed and with structure. And when we are very clear on how decisions will be made, by whom, and who will carry that forward, that person's going to be responsible and want to make sure that everyone is aboard. They'll go around and get the buy-in. They'll go around and get the consensus to make sure that people are on board and will be able to carry this through. But it reduces the workload across the board, means that we spend less time in meetings, and also it falls upon that person to make sure that the way forward is aligned with everybody else's. So the communication still happens, the consensus building is still there, the buy-in is still there, but the decision-making is clearly on one person who has a deadline to make that decision. So those are some of the comments that I wanted to take on today. And Andrea, thank you for putting up the comments here. Excuse me, I'm still fighting off a bad cold. So this is the method that I shared before. It's called the PROCE and the ADKAR model, a really powerful one that I've used in the past. Jay has this to share: agency, structure, and trust. Unions fill that space when those qualities don't exist. I think you're right. And you had mentioned also in another comment, didn't share, that the new Amazon labor union is a great example of leadership. It is one form of when change is needed. And it's one of the really powerful ways to see that happening. And then Andrea has this one great comment: pilot a new process It's low risk, but maybe all upside, low risk innovation and change. And I want to just add to that. One of the interesting things about pilots is that, again, there is this sense that if we pilot it, excuse me, hold on, is that if we pilot something, we have an option to not pursue it. So one of the things I like to do is to say, when we're piloting something, is to say also that this is, it has funding behind it too as well. Because oftentimes if we put a pilot in place and it works, we have to go back and get more funding, get approval for the funding. What I would say is that have agreement that if the pilot proves to be successful, that the go signal, if it meets certain parameters, then there's no need to go back and get more approval for more money. That if it meets certain standards, that you can go forward and get access to the full budget. And that is what oftentimes is missing. It's a pilot, but we can still say no if it was a success. If it's a success, then it's a go forward. But it has to be very clear what the go forward metrics have to be. And it is one of the biggest mistakes I find in innovation projects is that we're not going to be fully committed to if the pilot works. And we still want to see, we want to hedge our bets. Is it the right time or not? If you're going to okay the pilot, then okay the project. So it's one of those things where it's a small change, but a significant one, because you don't have to start all over again with all the approval processes. You already went through it once. Let's not do it again. Let's see. This is one other comment from Lydia. A clear plan for the change is the key to successful implementation for change, including all parties or department leaders in creating the plan helps to get everyone on board and say yes. Definitely need to identify the decision makers. One of the things that I also want to be very clear is this idea that what happens if one person says no? Because that can derail everything. And it's one thing to go around and get all the approvals from everybody to get that buy-in, but it can be really slow. And so one of my favorite principles from Amazon and their leadership principles is disagree and commit. And it just says again that I, as a decision maker, can have the ability to make a decision that some people may not approve of. Because otherwise, how do you move forward if you always have to get consensus from everybody? And this is the biggest problem, I think, in creating change management, in that we oftentimes think everybody has to agree, everybody has to be comfortable with things, and they may not be comfortable. But being able to go back to them and say, I know you didn't agree with this. I appreciate your perspectives, and we're going to do everything possible to mitigate those risks, but we're going to move forward. We're going to move forward still. Because otherwise, you're defaulting to the power of everybody to be able to say no. So I agree with Lydia. You do have to go around and make sure and check in with everybody. And one of the hardest parts, I think, especially after what we had to do with COVID, not everybody agreed at the beginning of COVID that we had to go back. But we had to, and that we had to go and make all those changes. But because we had to, somebody made that decision for us. We all went along with it. And I think, again, our ability to deal with that, our ability to understand and to be able to accept that is a key part to how change management needs to be different, especially now as we are going through so much change. The research that we're doing is finding that people, managers and leaders are saying, we went through a huge amount of change over the past 2 years. We expect there to be more change over the next 2 years. So buckle up, prepare yourselves, because it's going to be even harder now, because we had it done to us over the past 2 years. We had to do these things. Now we have a choice. And because of that, it's going to feel and be a lot harder because of the change management challenges. So I thank you again for all of the comments that you had today. That's what we have. That's what I had planned for today. Next week, I'm going to be talking about bravery. I recently saw a wonderful play when I was in London, Ocean at the End of the Lane. And one of the phrases that struck me was the main character was asked, can you be brave? can we be brave in the face of all of this change? What does it mean? What does it look like? And I want to explore that. What does it mean? And how do we create the sense of courage and bravery in our organizations to take on all these audacious changes that we're trying to create? So I look forward to seeing you next week at the same time. In the meantime, take care, be well, and I will talk to you very soon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.